Especially coming out of COVID, where we found there are lots of great ways for just dumping tons of information on people. And if that's all you're going to do, you don't really need to be gathered in physical space. And we had kind of a shared passion for really investing in the experience and trying to make it more contingent, more conversational, more participatory. You said that kind of citizen journalism mindset, and Patty also is always looking for ways to like activate the people in the room and give them things to do.
That is, that hard. There's a hard part there in like convincing them to go against what I think they're comfortable with. There is a point of like discomfort for trying something new that could go in unexpected ways, as opposed to let's have another executive have to go through another slides with speaker notes, which is the lowest risk they could do. Bigger the event is, the more complex it is, the more things can go wrong. So the more, risk averse people become. And so they're just trying to like focus on smooth execution. Unlocking like participation or engagement is almost like this new level that like, no, we just want to make sure that like the AV works, and that people have enough food.
Listen to the people. Listen to the people. People and culture. Oh yeah. It's time for the Gathering Podcast. It's time for the Gathering Podcast.
All right, well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us in studio today here at StartWell, uniquely at our event studio. We're out of our podcast studio. For our audience unfamiliar with innovation in physical events, live events, we're going to jam on some cool stuff.
Let's do it.
Because your company is called Projectory. Let's do a little kind of like down the line self-introduction, and then we'll see where that lands us.
Sounds good. So, Oren Berkovich, co-founder with these two lads, Projectory, been in event space for, I think just over 8 years. The three of us got a chance to do a lot of work together in different capacities, but I guess for me, the main focus is really on experience design, more on the production side of things. Really, how do you make intentional, thoughtful decisions that have an experiential aspect to them? So that's me in a nutshell.
Nice.
We got to know one another through Singularity University, I think. Now
we met when you were working with Singularity University, and that was probably around the time that I founded StartWell, like 2017ish.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Wow, that's like a lifetime away.
That's how I got to know Patty too, and Jeff, I guess.
So Jeff,
Also through Singularity.
Oh.
That's jumping way ahead in the story.
Okay.
But my backstory in brief, I'm Jeffrey or Jeff Rogers. And I actually came to some of the kinds of work that we're going to be talking about today initially through youth leadership and experiential learning. I was an outdoor educator doing wilderness education, programs like that, and then kind of cycled through different kinds of teaching and corporate training and facilitation practices, and eventually found my way also to Singularity University, where I met Oren when I was the kind of house facilitator for executive education programs at Singularity. And then we got a chance to work together a few times, came up to Toronto, worked on some of Oren's events, and he's kind of been stuck with me ever since.
That's right.
Patty.
Patty Harrington. I've been in the mix, I guess, now probably about 10 years. Before that, I studied architecture and literature, spent a good chunk of my career in design practice. That's not really graphic design. It's not architecture, it's sort of somewhere in between. And I often talk about what I do as the combination of storytelling and space.
I like that. That's cool. 2004-ish, I worked for a year with the Project for Public Spaces. Do you guys know who that is?
No.
So there was I guess this is like inspired by the work of William White and Jane Jacobs and these people. There was this methodology called placemaking that evolved out of this place called the Project for Public Spaces in Manhattan. And it was a think tank essentially led by Fred Kent and a couple other people that are known in that like world now. But yeah, so physical space, I moved there to New York for a year so that I could digitize their practice, because they had this methodology for like taking observational analysis and mixing it up with first-person data, like survey data, to reform and improve, I guess their thing is like spaces into places, and the transformation is about, emotional connection through the place and, with the place itself. But yeah, I digitized that. Then I moved to Toronto in 2005 to actually have a practice of doing that for online communities.
Cool.
I dig it though. But that's the thing. It's like worlds coming together around common interest, and it sounds like also, passion for improving things in some way.
Yeah.
And communication. Many
Yeah.
things.
I think in some ways design is maybe that connecting tissue, right? Like from visual design to learning design and facilitation, and in my space, like production and event design. But yeah, I think we all share that passion to, making conscious choices that have impact in the real world on people and spaces and whatnot.
Yeah, or bringing people together in a particular place to have a particular designed experience that we then hope will drive some kind of action or desired outcome or push a story forward.
So you guys have been kind of like working together for about a decade on different things, not necessarily
Different
as a
things, and
team.
then we had this irresistible opportunity to join forces like Voltron and
Make
something
tons of
greater.
money.
That's right.
What was that impetus though? Was there a particular impetus, or did everyone have their own for coming together?
Oren's been the real kind of spark that's seen, is the visionary of the group, I would say, for Projectory. And so I think he just had worked with us each individually and saw that together we could do something that wasn't really happening in the market. And so he sort of catalyzed this. That was about 2 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, a year and a half ago, maybe.
Like, hey, let's do something
2
really
summers ago.
difficult, guys.
2 summers ago.
Let's change some stuff. Let's really like walk on needles here together. But it's coming out of the pandemic, so you're used to that anyway.
It was really just kind of, I guess, hearing from each of them describe something that they create or they like doing, and things that they struggle with or don't like doing, and seeing how it fits into one piece,
Yeah.
like bigger piece together. So, I mean, I think with specifically Patty and Frontier, the design studio that Patty built, created Live Magazine, right? That was sort of like, and I think I showed you that at some point. It's, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, we started Frontier in about exactly 10 years ago. And one of the ideas was to start with a publishing practice because we were a new studio. We needed to get the word out and just kind of show our own perspective on design.
Yeah.
So we started with print documents and then had this romantic idea that print's not dead, it's going to come back, and then sort of slowly realized, well, actually it is not really coming back. So at one point we realized that really what we were interested in was more the kind of collection of stories. And so how do we do something to kind of gather stories in a way that you get the kind of kinetic energy of an event, but then you can capture that energy and package it in a way that people can return to later. And so we started collaborating with a few events, and we'd actually bring a little pop-up design studio to the event, and we'd actually even print posters. So you'd go to a talk, get a couple quotes, make a poster on site about that, a quote you heard from one of the speakers,
Yeah.
and then print them
Professors.
live and have them signed and by the speaker. So it became this really kind
I
of
dig it.
kinetic,
It's like-
active
Yeah.
layer on live events that brought a whole different kind of perspective to these events that wasn't there. Usually you go and then you walk away and it disappears into the ether, but this was a way to kind of both add something new to the event itself, but also produce something that could carry all the learnings and moments from the event into the future.
It's interesting. This idea of like mixed media and also the citizen journalism kind of vibe, like letting people translate their perspectives into communication pieces and then share that. And then again, if that goes back on a stage and you're just like live remixing an experience, lots of cool stuff comes out of that, right? People can be themselves in a way. And
Yeah, and I think like to me that solved a pretty big problem with live events, is that people come together and then everybody goes back to the day job, and like the whole information that was shared in the event, and specifically I'm talking about like corporate events, business events, think about sales
sure.
kickoff, user
Things you have to
conference,
go to.
like leadership events, things
Yeah.
like that. there's so much information shared in these events, and then people leave, but they're not really empowered with a way to bring it to their teams or to their colleagues or to their future selves or whatnot, and then they're just back to the day job as if hasn't happened, even though like companies invest millions of dollars in flying people in and putting these big productions, even though people walk away like it never happened. And so like to me, like knowing Live magazine and like the work that they've been doing, it was like, okay, this is interesting. It was like one piece of the puzzle of like post-event, what do you do when people leave? And then obviously, like I think with Jeff, like we've done a bunch of work together over the years of like me putting events together at Singularity University in Canada. And Jeff was sort of like my secret weapon. I knew like I'm putting him on stage, like no matter what happens, like it's going to be like a good event. Not boring. Yes.
To speak at the event.
Yeah, for Jeff to moderate, facilitate, MC, all sorts of things.
Yeah, not so much a speaker, but a facilitator, a framer, a kind of connector of dots, a weaver of a thread across like a programmatic experience. And I think what Oren and I kind of bonded over, and this feeds into everything that brought us together, and also something you said a minute ago, is this idea that those events, those gatherings could be something more. That there's such an emphasis on just broadcasting information so often, and we found that always really frustrating, and always wanted to really reward and honor the experience of a bunch of people showing up in a place, choosing to go there, be there together. And especially coming out of COVID, where we found there are lots of great ways for just dumping tons of information on people. And if that's all you're going to do, you don't really need to be gathered in physical space. And we had kind of a shared passion for really investing in the experience and trying to make it more contingent, more conversational, more participatory. Right. You said that kind of citizen journalism mindset. Yeah. Patty also is always looking for ways to like activate the people in the room and give them things to do, give them something cool to do together, that they would have had to have been there for that thing. And that's kind of what I've always wanted to do as a facilitator and an MC. And sometimes you show up at the event and somebody's like, hey, here are the program notes, here are the speaker intros, just read the cards. Yeah, you're like, and I don't really want to do that.
No.
So yeah,
no,
always
AI
looking.
I can do that.
Amen, brother. Yeah, this is really about my job
let
security
the
for the long
robots
term.
do the dumb shit, you know.
Yeah. Let me do something unpredictable with your people when you get them in a big room and they pay lots of money to be there.
Yeah.
Play a game.
It's such an interesting thing, right? Like conventional wisdom in kind of like, Monty Python reality is that like, this whole like accountancy firm of, the 1940s, that whole like ivory tower, power dynamic, large enterprise office is so interesting because those cultural kind of quagmires manifest in the awkwardness that people have when they're put together, but in a different context. And either they can excel at reverting to their natural self, or they kind of like overcompensate sometimes into this like quiet mode, and shut off. And of course, this is a campus where it's the first thing that happens every day. The first thing we hear within 5 minutes of a meeting assembling, is, no matter what the format of the meeting is, no matter what space or room it is at StartWell, people start laughing, and it's like, okay, now you know that they're getting into their groove. They're having fun with each other. They're comfortable.
Even if it's a nervous laugh?
Yeah. No, it's always this like from the belly laugh. Especially, I mean, like they come down and get a free barista drink from our barista and immediately have a like unexpected interaction with people. And that serendipity also plays a part of this, right? Like breaking people's expectations of an experience allows you to then let them be in the moment, right? That's cool, man. So you guys all jived on this stuff. What was like the was there a first gig where you collabed before you had the t-shirts to wear?
The t-shirts came in later.
Always make the t-shirt first, man.
So actually we took maybe a slightly unique approach to kind of spreading the word of what this thing is. It didn't really feel, I feel like at the core of what we do is experience. And so we try to have that as a guiding principle in everything we do, right? Okay. And it didn't feel right to just like cold email people about like, hey, like, can I grab some time in your schedule to talk about this new thing I'm doing?
It doesn't work anymore.
It doesn't work anymore. And frankly, like even LinkedIn or all the other tools, like it's just so much noise.
Yeah.
And I think we didn't really call it out until we sat down to write things down. But I think another one of these principles is that we all seem to like the physical and tactile. And so when we kind of brought this together, we came up with an idea to actually send a package to people that tells a little
As
bit
your
about
introduction.
the story.
This is your first. Here.
Yeah.
Here's who we are.
Like sending a physical thing, and actually it was an interesting
remember.
experience.
You showed that to me,
Yes.
and then you were like, "I can't give it to you." And I'm like, "What?" Yeah, it'll be like
What?
$59.99 or something.
No way.
The cost of printing is too much. This is my last one. There was some sort of
Did I not give it to you?
Yeah, you probably gave it to me.
I think I gave
I think
it to
you
you.
gave. You're a good guy. You gave it to me.
I gave it to you. Yeah, for sure. But yeah,
You were in
so
the premium tier.
so we've Patty and the team, I guess, designed this. How would you describe it? You do a better job at describing it.
Well, it's kind of full circle because we talked about print being dead, but by the time we got to this, I think actually it was hitting a point where people did welcome something
Tactile.
in the mail, because at that point, everything's so linked in all the time, digital, everything. So to get a piece of mail, you're almost like, what the hell is happening? It's a very strange experience.
It was a weird piece of mail.
And it was a weird piece of mail.
was a
We
weird- yeah.
designed it in a way that the physical experience of unfolding it sort of told a story, and then there was this sort of payoff when you finally opened up this sort of package, which was just a poster folded in a unique way that sort of just told you what Projectory was all about. And I mean, it had a huge, big impact.
Where we sent it to. I mean, the interesting thing from I guess just biz dev perspective is I reached out to a few people in my network, and I basically just said, hey, like, what's your mailing address? I want to send you a package, something physical. I didn't even say what it is, but I guess for people, people like, oh, what are you sending me? Like 99% of the people
were hesitant?
They just, here's my address.
Oh,
like
okay.
no problem at all. Whereas I think if I would have asked for half an hour of their schedule to tell them about this new thing, they would be, I don't know, less inclined, right? But there was something mysterious about like, okay, what are you sending me? Here's my address. And like almost all of the people responded with their address. And I sent it to about 200 people, I think. People I worked with in the past, just people in my network. And that pretty much set us forward for that entire first year. And through that, we started.
So that campaign yielded, like people got some stuff in the mail and they were like, this is brilliant. These guys know what they're doing.
I don't know if it was quite that. I think this was actually one of the things that was cool, and I don't know how much of this was intentional and how much we just kind of stumbled into through play.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple of awesome things that we've kind of wound up at on a little bit of like a non-linear path. And this, I think, was one of them. The thing that we sent out in the mail, like it was folded up in this kind of like origami mailer thing that Patty came up with. And also, frankly, it was so early on, we didn't have T-shirts. I'm not sure if we were entirely clear on exactly what it was that we were going to be doing for all of our prospective clients. But we sent this thing out that was like at the intersection of pretty cool, kind of weird and unique, and also a little bit vague. And so people would respond to Oren, hey, I got this thing in the mail. I want to know more, would love to talk. And then it actually gave Oren and then us a chance to kind of hear what were they interested in? What did they find appealing about this? And we can kind of go into these conversations with an attitude of being open to learning about what could we bring in terms of building on this initial teaser experience that they were excited about. Like, why is this interesting to you? And I think that kind of let us learn our way in the right direction in a useful way.
It's so interesting because, again, for any of our audience that might be listening who's into, consulting services and like feels like there's this distinction, at least for enterprise clients, between like, productized offerings and then more bespoke, and how like bespoke has felt a little bit like I can send it to India. People are kind of like tiering these things a little bit, depending on what industry and what product and all this stuff. But the intrigue factor is brilliant because ultimately, as any sort of like, solutions provider, you want to create solutions. So if they're context sensitive, and they're unique and bespoke, even if it's a product that has that built into it, it's going to be awesome for the customer. So they should be intrigued, but
And
you have
that's
to
how we
make them
framed it.
intrigued. Yeah.
Like it was basically an invitation to join as a development partner. And we said we're developing this new way of experiencing live events, and we're inviting a handful of organizations to join as development partners while we're still in stealth mode. And that was essentially that once you open the thing and read the content, that was effectively that. And then, yeah, we were invited to, I think there were probably at least 3, 4, 5 events coming out of that particular package, and it kind of started rolling. Yeah, so we ended up going to Mexico City with
Awesome.
Reuters. We did our first big event was this CEO forum called the McKay CEO forum. So there were 400 CEOs in the room, and then. Yeah, we got invited to Ottawa to do an event with the Canadian Medical Association. They were also received a package. The interesting thing is, I think one of the opportunity, because it didn't feel like marketing pamphlet where you just toss in the garbage. Like people took it. We actually got some opportunities through somebody that showed it to somebody else. And so, yeah, we even did an event with the Royal Canadian Mint, the minting
Nice.
industry.
Right.
So, not the typical audience that you would think of when you think about like engagement and movement, right? Like it was
Like they didn't like
coin
moving?
collectors, basically.
Money.
Money.
But I do think in some ways that first piece was kind of a key that unlocked it, what the core Projectory is from the start, because it had a few characteristics. You know, it was experiential, it was telling a story, it was fun, and it was in some ways you were delivering a message in a way that you wouldn't typically get it. So because it was experiential, it actually was relevant and meaningful. And it stuck with you.
Right.
And that's exactly the same way we think about everything we do,
Yeah.
instead of having those characteristics.
No, it's so important, right? And it's especially in this world that's overly digitized and coming out of, COVID, where people's kind of like for years now, they've been over frying their brains with digital experiences that they're not even like the early web fun stuff. Do you remember Flash? Like Flash was terrible, but we all hated and loved it at the same time because it was like, what could you do with this crappy thing to try and engage people, but also make their eyes go, wow. Yeah. And now it's like, I think a lot of the messaging that people are subject to online is so advertorial, even if it's personal, like the Instagram selfie world, that, refreshing experiential stuff kind of wakes people out of their coma and says, hey, this is great.
And physical. I think people, this at least caught me a bit by surprise that people repeatedly call out, oh, I love how tactile this is. I love this. Even just now, we're setting up for this big event at Deloitte that's going to happen tomorrow. And a bunch of like event planners there were running around freaking out that where we placed one of our installations, we'll get to talk about how everything we were talking about manifests itself, but it also includes some physical installations that we set up, and they were freaking out that we put it in a place that doesn't have power, and we're like, no, we don't need power. None of this needs.
Yeah, we got ping pong balls.
Yeah,
and-
we have yarn. We have all
Human
sorts of
power.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is, to your point, how everything is digital. People seem to gravitate to the fact that what we bring is tactile and physical, and that seems to be attractive to them.
I think, again, especially coming out of the experience of like the hard lockdown part of COVID, where events and live convenings and gatherings in person had so drifted away, and people missed that. And people wanted to have that again. They wanted to get together. And if they're going to get together, giving them something to do. And we like to give them something to get their hands on and to do together, to build together.
Yep.
And I think there was a real appetite for that and kind of an awareness of the limitation of digital tools and digital experiences for communication and kind of, creating some kind of collective in the moment. And I feel like that's been an opportunity that we've leaned into, really.
It's super interesting because, the timing is so opportune that like especially here in Toronto, right? And in here in Canada, but in Toronto and Ontario, where we had like the longest lockdowns outside of China, maybe, or maybe,
Yeah, I've heard that.
right? Like it was on again, off again. No one knew, and like how that broke people's patterns of behavior and their sense of community and their ability to commit to communal activity was so interesting for us as a space operator that enables people to gather physically. 2020, let's not talk about 1 or 0, but like 2022 was the first, coming back togethers where people were coming in groups, and the first thing they would do when they came into the building was do a COVID test and then sit there waiting. And it was like, okay, now I can participate with my coworkers. Yeah. So there's so many barriers to just being relaxed and and that it's a really weird year. It took a while for people to, right?
People locked down long enough, they realized they actually missed their coworkers.
Yeah. Honest. And the other thing that
pent up demand.
Yeah.
Even in that first event in the event we did in Mexico, I remember that clearly. That there was some, it was a 3-day event. It was their top 500 leaders, and there are clearly people that like over the course of the event ended up like not coming back for day 2 or day 3. Like,
manifestly ill.
Oh, they disappeared?
Well, they just ended up testing positive, but it was still that awkward moment where like you could do events and their hand sanitizer and
but they're doing the rolling tests day by day.
Oh my gosh. So. Yeah, it was a crazy time, right? And then we heard this too, is like everyone wanted to commune, they wanted to come back together, but they had that fear paradigm. Then last year 2023 was like a kind of a false start almost in a way too. Like Q1 was kind of weird. And we saw a lot of activity in Q2, Q3, people wanting to get together. No Christmas parties at all last year, in that sense. But the nature of, I think organizations are starting to learn for themselves, especially if they have a people in culture office or steward. They are starting to learn for themselves what is important for their people, and it feels new, which is interesting. And then, of course, part of that is when they come together, what do their people want to do? And a lot of that is experiential. We're seeing it even down to like meal choice and pre and post programming, and why they need a facilitator to be able to enable them to like learn how to talk in flesh space again, and all these things. So what are some examples? In fact, you brought some images, right? So
yeah,
I don't know if it jumps the gun on talking about how you guys started, manifesting the kind of philosophy that you share. But this is your brand on stage somewhere. See, I see a Banks
CIBC
logo.
That was a big event for us last year. And this is Jeff on stage doing his thing.
Wearing the same T-shirt.
In some ways, what was interesting about this is this was when all the pieces came together for the first time in the most powerful way. And in some ways, like it connects to something that I find really important personally, which is that, if you're talking about trying to change things, like actually change things for real, then you need to have people on board and not just kind of getting it intellectually, but they have to feel it, and it has to become something that they believe in themselves. And so for this event, imagine you're a giant corporation, you've got a whole raft of senior people, and you're trying to both, like, typically what you do is you throw a bunch of slides at them, have people drone on for hours, and they'd just be
it's one person at a time on stage,
and they're doing this the whole time. They're just scrolling their phones, right? So this to me was the first time where I actually saw all the pieces come together myself, because we'd done sort of things individually. So seeing Jeff do his thing and then the way he does it, you're going, okay, it's like it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. And I'd started to see what Oren had seen, I think, for a while, but just seeing people actually connect with what was being said and having them genuinely engaged in a way that was not just their head, but their heart too, was amazing, because people leave that room now genuinely committed to what they've been hearing for the last couple of days, instead of just kind of like, like I said, scrolling their phones and walking away.
What's your perspective on this, like the duty of the MC?
I have a fantastic mentor who told me a long time ago that facilitation is always in service of the experience, right? That you should always be thinking about every choice you're making through that lens, is like, what is this doing for the group of people that you've brought together? How are you supporting the experience that they need to have, or that they want to have, or that they have an opportunity to discover? And so for me, an event like this one, is actually a really unique and fun challenge. And this, again, I think is one of the things that the three of us have in common. The idea of how do you take a 400 or 500 person event for a large financial institution that's going to go on for 3 days and make this not only like a decent experience, but something that really feels participatory, like they're invited to contribute and that they hear from each other, and that the most senior executives hear from all the other people in the room. And like that's not an easy thing to do. And for me, that kind of begins with the framing and the energy from a facilitator in front of the room, like convincing people that this is for them.
Right.
And you do have a role to play. And then if you say that, you now actually have to give them things to do. And you have to, if they're going to take a step with you, you have to actually lead them on that journey, which I think is kind of the craft of facilitation for me in a nutshell.
And so you guys come into an engagement, at least for this one, as what's the Projectories? How do you fit in a box? Sorry to ask that, but like, how do they?
It's very nicely folded.
What's on the invoice? Like, are you because if you're hosting in a sense?
Well, there is basically 3 distinct things that we do, but the idea is that we're helping the event organizer bring their content to life, their event to life through these participatory experiences that we do in the room, like what you see in this picture, right, is Jeff in front of everybody inside the room. Right. But we also do some things. We build interactive installations outside the room, and then both the activities we have inside the room and outside the room generate a lot of output that then becomes what happens after the event. So I can kind of break down each one of these things.
Sure.
But the idea is that, we follow after a content part. Okay. Usually, an executive will be on stage talking about the new features, the new strategy, the new leadership, fill in the blank, right? It's usually a lot of slides with a lot of heavy content. That is, the modality is somebody talking at the audience. Yeah. It could be a panel talking at the audience, but the audience they're not participating. They're just attending. And sometimes we say like turning attendees to participants, basically helping them be proactive and give their undivided attention. Yep. So usually after like a content heavy segment, Jeff will come on stage and will introduce some sort of a mechanism for engagement. Right? It could be all sorts of things. I mean, you could speak to that, but it will be a way that enables the participants to take the content they just heard from their executive, from a speaker or whatnot, and just do something with it. Discuss it, distill it, decide on it, reflect on it. Am I doing it justice? Do you want to join there?
I just wanted to see how many of those you were going to come up with.
Yeah, how many words, adjectives can you spit out?
But yeah, and this gets back to that idea again of trying to solve interesting problems. And very often the convening organization, the event organizers will come and they'll say, yeah, we have this actually pretty rad block of content, but then we want people to be able to do something with it. And they don't always even know what the thing they want them to do is. Right. But, maybe it's, we want them to have like a rich, inclusive conversation where they're connecting with other people in the room and they're hearing different perspectives on the issues that were just raised. And we help design a structure that will enable that kind of experience. Like, okay, great challenge. So how do you have a follow-on conversation for 400 people where you get to hear some different perspectives on the issues that were raised, and also maybe get a sense for, in aggregate, how are people feeling in the room?
Right. We need that feedback loop for the whole team so everyone feels like they did something, but also their output is shareable and is relatable.
Yes, that they're doing a thing and then also creating a thing that then can stay with them, that has some value that extends beyond the experience there. And I mean, there are a lot of different ways you could approach that, but ultimately you want something that rises above the, okay, you all just heard from a speaker, now talk to each other for a little while.
Yeah, because that's just not awesome. And everyone's looking at their feet.
Yeah, like, for what? What are we doing here?
Yeah, it feels like a waste of time. It needs some structure to be productive, and that's the thing we bring. And it could be in like shorter segments that are like 20-minute long into like, longer session that are kind of weaved throughout the agenda. So we will come on and off sometimes multiple times
Right.
to just follow in a content session and bring it to life in a meaningful way that is not, okay, just talk about what you just heard.
So your work begins in advance of the event, getting materials from the client for what they're going to present to distill it and pre-plan some creative solutions here.
Yeah, to some extent, a lot of it starts from like an objective, right? In this particular case, like one of the things that they pointed out is, we gather all the leaders once a year and then everybody walks away and there's no commitments or clear next steps. So help us design a mechanism that builds that commitment towards next steps. So we will take that problem and solve it through some sort of interactive experience that Jeff will facilitate on stage, or Patty will build something or design something physical and things along those lines. But I would say a lot of it is improv in some ways.
Sure, it has to be, right? Because the dynamics of the room always change.
Yeah, and
There's
you don't really
variables.
know. It's kind of like
CEO bombs, man. Or says something that you just can't
You
work
put
with.
the
You change the
scaffolding.
slides around,
that's how it's it's kind of like building scaffolding, and then you don't really know what the final structure is going to look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's that slide. I don't know what's coming next, but you
take a look.
probably be able to see some of the things we do outside the room. Yeah, so this is an example of
It's a
physical.
person in a futuristic prison.
Yeah, locked in glass. What is that? Those are
Patty,
tubes.
Patty, what is this? What are we looking at?
I think if you go to the next one, maybe. Okay, now I know we can recut all this, so
We'll
there's
go
another
back.
better view of it, actually. This one.
Here we go.
Okay.
So this is something we call ping pole, and it's completely customizable. But again, there's no plugs anywhere, no electricity. It's simply voting. So in this particular case, we go to the client, we say, what are some issues that you're dealing with, and what do you want to get? So just a quick snapshot of your sentiment among your team. And
Right.
so we work with them to come up with these themes, and then there's ping pong balls sort of in the lower base there that are just readily, you just reach in and grab one, someone there to help you walk through it, and you basically just vote with your ping pong ball. And so over the course of the event, it starts to fill up and you get a live visualization of what the sentiment is among your team, basically. So it's a fun, easy, tangible, tactile way to do sort of audience sentiment analysis.
Yeah.
And then after the fact, we'll actually turn it into more formal data. Sometimes we'll use AI to help find patterns and then produce a report that then goes to the client as a way to kind of give them that snapshot. And also, frankly, as a way to remind all the attendees who were there what the trends and ideas were and how people are feeling about certain things. So it's a good sort of echo for the event that further reinforces the event and the effect and the impact of the event after it's over.
Let's go. This a similar kind of thing. What is this? What are we looking at?
So this one we call Idea Forest.
Each one of these things that are hanging is a streamer that has a response to a question that we've asked leading up to the event. So when you register, this was for a medical company, and as part of the registration, we've asked the people who registered, to come up with a sentence about the healthcare of the future or something like that. And then we printed those on streamers, and you can literally kind of walk through that structure and see everybody's responses. It also, in this particular case, serves as a kind of, a separator between different spaces. They had like the main stage area and then like a more of an exhibit area. So you can kind of walk through it, but it also cuts through the space into two sections.
And while we're not digital, we understand that everyone has a phone, and it's a great moment. If you're in the middle of this thing
Right.
and you're taking a selfie, you've got this pretty incredible environment that you're able to take a picture of. So while on the one hand, we're totally analog, on the other hand, we understand the context we're working in. So we're always thinking about how do you get that shot that, again, just kind of increases the ripple effect.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so
We should talk about this.
let's talk about this. Then I've got a couple notes on all this stuff, which is brilliant.
Yeah. This you said earlier that a lot of times the thing we create, you know what I'm about to say?
Yeah, we just played our way into this idea where
This started as a joke.
Yeah.
This particular thing.
Okay.
we knew we needed to design some kind of experience that was going to allow, again, for some sort of prioritization, voting, expression of different viewpoints
Sure.
Across a large population in a room that happened to have 30-foot ceilings. And we somebody along the line made a joke about
You
maybe
made
it was-
that joke.
all right.
Yeah.
Somebody. I don't do anything.
I made a very high value joke about how we could actually just like raise and lower balloons and have people vote with a big helium balloon. And then Patty was like, yeah, we could do that. And eventually this became, I think, one of the coolest experiences that we've designed. And, there's so many ways that you could have people vote on a thing or express their opinions and aggregate some of those. There are 1,000 different apps. You could everybody do that on their phone, and that is totally joyless. And I don't really think we need more of those experiences. And so we wanted to do something quite different. And this actually spoke to the challenge I mentioned earlier of how do you create the structure to enable a conversation for 400 or 500 people where they can discuss some difficult questions that don't necessarily have a right answer and share their perspectives, and then have to kind of agree a little bit on a thing and then hear from each other. And so the way that this worked, we had 3 or 4 big strategic questions for the group to consider.
Okay.
And we would put a question up on a slide, and the question had 4 different perspectives that they could argue in favor of. And we gave them
Hire,
a few
fire,
minutes.
buy, or sell.
Right on. Yeah. We gave them a few minutes to discuss this question at their table. And they're in a group of like 6-ish leaders. And we said, look, you're going to have only 3 or 4 minutes to discuss this, share your strong opinions about the right path here, and then somehow you all have to align on a position that your table collectively takes.
Okay.
And then I'm going to tell you it's time to vote. And kind of like a real organization, you can't debate things endlessly. At some point, you have to just choose something.
Right.
So we give them some time to chat with each other. They hear from the people at their table. Then we say, it's time to make your votes. And Patty had designed a mechanism that sat on the top of the table and had a little hand crank. And you crank it, the device one way, and it lets the balloon up into the air. And I mean, it's a pretty big balloon.
Sure.
And you have 60 of these balloons rising
Wow, that's
at the same time in this room, and each one has kind of ribbons tied at different intervals to accord with a position, like an answer choice. We've gone for sell, right? And so we go out to the third position. And man, this is a group of very senior leaders. These are very accomplished people.
I
And when
actually
you get to
recognize the
point-
back of one of those guys' heads. I'm pretty certain I know who that is. I think that's my wife's cousin's husband.
What's his name?
Don't put me on the spot, man.
Just make one up. Nobody knows.
Wait, what city was this in?
This is
Toronto.
Toronto. This is at CIBC Square.
Oh no, it's
Is
that guy's
that
brother.
person
He's a
senior
smiley.
leader at CIBC?
I think so. He used to be at
So he was
City
in-
though, so that's why.
All right. Well, whoever he is, there's a
How
pretty
can
good
I
chance
not
when these
remember that guy?
balloons are going up, almost every single person in that room just looks up and has this moment of kind of surprise and delight. No one doesn't love balloons rising like that. And once the balloons reach their position, we can kind of look out across the room and identify tables that have the different perspectives represented and run over to a table with a microphone and say, hey, Oren, I see your table was actually in favor of being more aggressive with the rollout of these digital options for your customers. Why? And Oren gives the strongest argument that his table could come up with for that thing, not necessarily having to own the position himself
It's the
in front of the whole
tables,
room.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
this is what the table thought.
That guy thought the CEO's an idiot. It's
Yeah.
not me, it's the table, but it's really that guy.
But it's a great way to get a strong argument for that perspective out into the room, and the senior executives hear it, everybody hears it, and we'd hear from a couple different tables, get those different perspectives expressed, have a moment for some of the executive leaders to respond, and then we would do another question. We managed in the 50 or so minutes we had for that session to create a really unique experience that was very unexpected, allowed people to get a sense of what lots of other people in the room thought, and engage in a meaningful way with some issues and some questions that are pretty important to the organization.
And I would say
Faisal is his name. Faisal.
Yeah, Faisal was definitely looking up like, holy shit, this is awesome. I'm glad I'm here.
one of my
Wait, you know who I'm talking about? You know, is that the guy?
Sure.
Okay.
No, but I know that almost everyone in that room was like, this is totally not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
today.
Which is, there was a moment of triumph for me for that few days where there was one table with the CEO, CFO, COO sitting together, and I can't remember who it was specifically, but we were told that one of them was a particularly hard nut to crack. You know, they were very, very serious and were not buying into any of this stuff.
Right.
And so, of course, we had sort of hawk eyes on that person, and there was a moment where they were, you know, cranking the crank up, and they were sort of had this look, and then they sort of went. And that was for us like, okay, that is Projectory, you know.
But you know, it really does capture it, because I feel like, you know, this experience, we call it floating opinions. Each experience has like a
Cheeky name.
A cheeky name.
Yeah.
It really captures like you know, like for you, like you had to. It's the first time we've done it. It's high stakes. It was definitely going to be things that would go wrong. And you've never facilitated it before. And so lots of like improv, being good on the feet, having some jokes, building suspension, you know, being prepared for whatever goes wrong. For Patty, like just coming up with that device, there was just so many things that we needed to take into account, from like, you know, where the vents are in the ceiling so the balloons will not fly everywhere, to, you know, I mean, just even making sure that when you reel it, it doesn't get tangled. And like we had to do all these different prototypes, and how big should it be? How much should it weight? How to design it? How to brand it? Like just so many of these problems needed to be solved. And then like for me, usually I'm like the client facing person. So I needed to like convince CIBC in this particular case that this is a good idea. You know what I mean? Like, sure, we can just put a QR code and have everybody vote instantly, but this is a better idea. And a lot of times, like that is, you know, that hard. There's a hard part there in like convincing them to go against what I think they're comfortable with. There is a point of like discomfort for trying something new that could go in unexpected ways, as opposed to let's have another executive have to go through another slides with speaker notes, which is the lowest risk they could do.
So it seems like, okay, through all the manifestations of these tools and devices that you create and experiences, play is like a number one important aspect, right? What can you just generally say philosophically or otherwise about play, and how play and work are, you know, should be intertwined or otherwise?
Well, I mean, yeah, okay. So in the world of creative invention, ideation, you know, I always like the analogy of there's the beer time and the coffee time. Beer is when you're coming up with ideas, coffee is when you're refining them. And beer has sort of a looseness and a different way of thinking. Your brain's just working in a totally different state. And people would equate that to play. And that's where new insight, new ideas, new things come from. And so for us, like all the way up and down our process, I would say play is important. In the joking about a balloon going up and down is a playful moment that then it's a beer moment that becomes a coffee moment, so to speak, right? So we have a few others of those ideas in the can that we're thinking about now that started as jokes and then become a real thing. And then it, of course, flips over to the context of an event where it's a similar principle at play.
He's talking about the whale, Jeff.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, the whale coming soon. Keep your eye out for that one.
The whale.
Floating whale.
Ooh, nice.
All right, but you have to go, so
Yeah.
we'll continue from here, and then
Okay, sounds good.
Beer time, Patty.
Beer time.
beer time for Patty.
Thanks for joining us, Patty. All right. Yeah. So, okay, play was one thing that I caught out, of course, in the work. But what else can you guys add to this? Like, especially, Jeff, if you're in the moment and you're trying to bring people together, right? And you're trying to get them kind of excited about being together and interacting with the content. Where do you see apprehension disappear?
I actually think play is kind of a key part of that. Play is really good as a learning and exploration modality because people give themselves permission maybe to go a little further, maybe to entertain or express an idea that perhaps they otherwise wouldn't necessarily or wouldn't give themselves permission to take seriously. In play, we kind of lower the stakes and it lets you be a little more imaginative. It lets you pick something up and not necessarily worry about how you're going to be seen for asking this question or for arguing this perspective in a debate on an idea. And if we can kind of create an environment, an atmosphere of play, we can make people a little bit more comfortable stepping out of their comfort zone into that zone of what we could call productive disequilibrium, where we're out there bringing in the new things,
Right.
taking in the new ideas, entertaining different perspectives, listening to people who disagree with us. If it's all in play and it's all good fun, or at least
Exactly.
it is all playful
Right.
in a way that is also productive, we can actually, as Patty said, be a little more creative, a little bit more imaginative, and maybe set aside some of the things that normally would prevent us from taking on new and different challenges.
Well said. I think it's crucial, and it's also something that you probably see as so refreshing for the attendees in these experiences. They're like, wow, we didn't know that this kind of experience
Yeah.
was even possible.
And I think it takes this delicate balance to do well,
Yeah.
because you don't want to make people uncomfortable, but you also don't want to push them at all, that it just becomes this like dull experience that
Right.
they're bored. And so finding that nuance of how much can we push them that they're likely to enjoy it and see the value in it and want to participate, versus trying to do something that is too far out that will make them uncomfortable and will actually be, not engaging. They would disengage. They would
Yeah.
not want to participate, right? Like even the example we talked about earlier about like saying, okay, you all just heard this presentation, now talk about it. It doesn't feel like there's enough value there for people to say, okay, so here's what I've heard, and really lean in, right?
Right.
So you want to find that balance where it's just right, and people feel like, okay, like this is exciting, like I'm in this exploratory mode, or like I wanna see where this leads to. And I think that takes a lot of experience that, Jeff brings as a learning designer, but also a lot of trial and error. Like
Yeah.
every time we run an event, we are trying different things and perfecting it a little bit, saying, oh, what if we do it this way? And, it's, I think the things we do incredibly well are the ones that we got to do many, many, many times to really perfect to a point where like it's kind of like our signature moves. You know what I mean? Like these are things that we know will work really well because they've been tested so well so many times.
When talking to a potential new client, right? So someone who's got kind of like a tentpole event coming up, I'm guessing it's that's the use case. Like it's not so much let's get you in next Friday. It's more like we've got this thing in 3 quarters, and that's when we bring out the whole team together. I guess the question is, how much of the expectation from the client side is of let me choose a la carte from some sort of catalog versus, oh, we'd love you guys to just handle this stuff. Tell us what you need and just do it.
Yeah, I mean,
Trying to paint a range of different kind of asks.
I think the way that we navigate those is, in some ways it's kind of tied to what I said earlier in terms of finding that balance. Because if we come up with a blank page to say, hey, like we'll design whatever you want.
Then there's all this trust,
Well, they also don't know what they want, right? And if we come with like, hey, look through this like catalog of 100 experiences, it's also overwhelming a little bit. So we do have like a set of examples that are, typically like go really well to solve common challenges that organizers have. But we definitely signal that like, hey, we're open to creating a new thing if you don't find what you want here. I think the key point for us in like new conversations is to call out that our experiences are content agnostic. Like they bring the content, we just kind of help them bring it to life. And so sometimes we are kind of sitting on our hands and not able to design something because they don't know what their content is. And they don't have their run of show figured out to let us know how much time we have. Because it's very different if we have 5 minutes or if we have 90 minutes. We need to design to support that time block we've got and the objective that they have and the content that happens before us and after us. So in some ways, like we're kind of co-designing this with them. And yeah, it takes the runway to do. We can't just do it, for your event next week kind of
Yeah, it sounds like it's a collaborative process, right? So typically, do you find that client organizations have event planning functions within them? They have people whose job it is to plan events, think about events.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with events teams, right? People who work at a company in an events capacity. Usually they sit under marketing. A lot of times it's kind of part of the CMO org. Sometimes our buyers are actually HR leaders. So
Interesting,
they
yeah.
have learning and development programs, or the yearly leadership event or partnership meeting is there. So it really depends what the nature of the event to know who is kind of the leader inside the organization to own it. So a user conference, things like that will fit under the CMO role sometimes. It really depends that way. And also like whether it's an external event or internal event. This is another big thing where external events, like a lot of times people bring their clients together and things like that, and all they want to talk is about their new features, their roadmap, their new product, right? And typically, sure, you might have some keeners in the audience that really want to know about
But they're not all going to go away with that great message. Oh, I'm so excited about this new
Unless you're
feature in
Apple,
our
you know what I mean?
payroll software.
yeah, if you're a developer, yes. You
And
can
even
go to
Apple, I mean, it's like everyone, they got a parachute out of a plane
It's
just
true.
to get people's attention. And then what do
Have
they
you seen that
parachute?
one?
What do they parachute? What was on the parachutes? It says like television operating system, computer operating system, mobile operating system. What? They're all operating. How do you have so many operating systems?
Yeah.
So this complexity kind of convolutes the excitement factor that you can even solicit from the audience, right? That does lead me to question, have you had any client experiences or want being expressed by HR teams, people ops, to bake in solutions to their organization? Say, wow, this would be great if we could learn from you guys to have our culture be one more of play.
Not so much for culture, but we do see a trend for people to want to use some of our stuff for their internal meetings and things like that. Frameworks and things along those lines. So, I mean, this is something that we've been kind of playing around with this model of licensing some of the things.
Cool.
We definitely see a need and a demand from event organizers to have some sort of a self-service mode where we can ship some of these physical installations to an event, and their team will. It's you've seen in some of the pictures it's fairly easy to build and tear down. It's designed to be robust. We create custom boxes for everything. We show up like a rock band at these events.
Yeah,
right?
you got your roadies just unpacking stuff.
So yeah, we're working on all of that. But I think the biggest opportunity in some ways is turning all of that output into post-event activities. Because that's another low-hanging.
The living culture of the event.
Yeah, there's just so many conversations happening in these events, so many aha moments, so many, kind of mental notes, decisions, conversations that just disappear. And so for us, we call it event extensions. Basically everything that happens that we facilitate in the room or outside the room through the installations generates so much output that is then turned into what we call event extensions. It's almost like think about it as a live event companion, right? It takes all the content from the event, everything that the participants themselves generated, not just, 8 hours video of all the keynotes. Nobody's going to watch it. It's kind of imagine you missed a basketball match or whatever. You're not going to watch the whole match again. You want the highlights. You want the commentary. You want the stats. You want We're working on creating ways to turn all of that conversation, all these conversations, all that output into things that actually are actionable and live somewhere and have utility to them. Right?
I love that you just ended firmly on me there.
how would you?
Why, yes, I do agree, in fact. And to give that an example, so this doesn't just stay at the abstract,
Yeah.
two things that you haven't seen yet, because they weren't in that slide deck. There's one installation that's one of the ones that we get the request from a lot of our clients for. It's really adaptable. We're doing it for the Deloitte event tomorrow. And we call it Futures Web, but the idea is that every participant is given a little ball of yarn, and the yarn that they have is color coded that represents something like their tenure at the organization or maybe what industry they're in, depending on the event, it'll be that kind of thing. And then they take that ball of yarn and they weave their strand across a couple of posts that have different positions on them that the yarn can go around and through to answer different questions. So they're kind of giving their input, and it creates a line that corresponds with this person's experience or this person's point of view.
Right.
And it's pretty rad that, like, the first person, they're just going up there and doing it.
Yeah.
But by the 10th or 12th person, they're going up because they want to see what's already up there. And now they add some more. And then it's got this network effect thing where the more people go up to it because they want to look at it, and then they add, and then it becomes more valuable. It also becomes harder and harder to take in at a glance because there's a lot of information. And it is color-coded. It's nicely organized. It's this rich tapestry of information about your participants. But it's really great after the event.
Right.
We can digitize all of that and represent it in different ways and cut it up for our clients so that they can do whatever they want to turn all of that input into some different insights by helping them find some patterns, maybe helping them identify some things that they want to dig into a little bit further. If it's a sentiment, if it's a position that's shared throughout the organization, that kind of thing. And then the other one that we're particularly fond of as a closing, Oren mentioned the importance of, at the end of an event, actually having something that people commit to, so that it's not just, hey, we did all this and we had all these conversations, but to what end?
Right.
And a lot of our clients, we noticed, want to have some kind of like closing, next steps, concrete actions. And we designed an in-room facilitated experience where we have the participants think a little bit about, collectively, what do we want to achieve over some, next time frame? Like the people in this room, collectively, what was really important to us? And then they jot some of that down and they move around the room and they exchange the cards they've jotted it down on. And we have this whole thing as like a kinesthetic activity. So people are moving, they're mingling. There also is a mechanism for kind of ranking and prioritizing it, valuing the things that are the most important. And then we have a follow-on piece to that where they then make their individual commitments to, how am I going to support this thing that we agreed was a really big deal for us?
Right.
And all of that, of course, gets saved on cards and posters and sticky notes and different media, and then we digitize it all afterward and can cut it up. We can put it in spreadsheets. We can put it in a database. We can put it in this after-event report. All these kinds of extensions that ultimately help the client get the most out of the experience that they had together, and actually have a thing that they can follow up on, a thing that they can build an email campaign around, all sorts of opportunities, again, for us to design clever, engaging, creative means for helping them achieve the things that they really want to do through their events.
It sounds like the bulk of the engagements that you do are typically going to be large format, like multitudes of hundreds of people.
I think our sweet spot at the moment is somewhere between, like, I would say 100 to 500. The problems we're solving become greater the bigger the group is in some ways. You know what I mean? Like, having the three of us have an engaging conversation, it's enough to just put us here and we can talk and, But if there was 300 of us here, it will be more difficult, right?
Definitely.
And so I think a lot of times there is, like, board meetings and things like that. Like, there is some social pressure. You can't have noise canceling earphones and be at your laptop when you're just surrounded by, 4 or 5 other people. It's just, there's some norms there that you are going to feel uncomfortable doing. But if there is hundreds of people around you, you can kind of, not engage and, not be called out for it. So yeah, hundreds of people. And then sometimes, if there's events that have thousands of people, that introduces other challenges. Like usually there won't be roundtables; they'll be theater style,
Right.
which is built for theater, right? It is for performance, people on stage performing something. It's not built for engagement.
Right.
It's not theater.
Right.
So coming up with ways of how do you make that format engaging. And then, sometimes in such large scale events, we'll have multiple installations, or we will be in charge of like one of the breakouts, right? So it becomes almost like acceptable that in the main plenary session, you're not going to be engaged because there's 2,000 people. But if you actually want to do something, then it's a breakout. And so sometimes that's how it will play out.
But there are occasions where you could work with like 100 people, you said, would be
Yeah.
typically the minimum. That's interesting because obviously we have got like 2 venues at least that can accommodate that. We should be doing some stuff together.
I mean, some of the things are, this is a lot of times I kind of find it interesting that none of it is, I find it brilliant. You know what I mean? It's not. And
The work
even,
that you do?
yeah,
Okay.
honestly, no, it's
He's mostly talking about his stuff.
Yeah.
Patty's in mind. Well,
I think the key is really being intentional and thoughtful about these things. So you know that this has value and you prioritize it. You prioritize participation. You prioritize being intentional about placing these things. So how the experience is. And so, even for a 100 people event, like having some of these activities is going to be enriching and different.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is the missing link in most kind of gatherings. And it's kind of this inflection thing. Like the larger gatherings leave aside logistics, just I think the people planning them typically become undercapacitated to, create innovation and create inclusion and create dynamicism in the experience design. They kind of just say, okay, let's focus on the content, focus on the base logistics, and just get it done.
Exactly. It comes from, the bigger the event is, the more complex it is, the more things can go wrong. So the more, risk averse people become. And so they're just trying to focus on smooth execution. Unlocking participation or engagement is almost like this new level that no, we just want to make sure that the AV works, and that people have enough food. So yeah, and this is why I think everything we've built is designed to be customizable, so we can easily plug it in and kind of make it easy for these event organizers. This is not a huge adventure with hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment. Our stuff is adaptable. It's easy to integrate it into the agenda and floor plan. It's customizable to their content. So it's supposed to be super easy to make them feel like this is not high risk and it's a huge reward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the way. The event doesn't become about Projectory
No.
at all, right? It should just elevate the experiences at the
It
event.
is not our event. This is their event, no doubt.
yeah, in service of the experience.
Yes.
Very much.
So I like this idea of kind of micro formatting stuff to be able to kind of enable people that you can't physically get to take your tools and make them make their events a little bit better.
Yes.
You got the productization piece. What else I guess is the near future looking like for Projectory as a team? Are you growing? What's on the horizon? What's happening? It's been you said a couple of years now, right? That you guys have been doing stuff together?
I mean, we officially came out with this and started spreading the word in February this year.
Okay, so this is newer than
it's
I thought.
fairly new, yeah. All of last year, we've worked with these set of what I mentioned earlier, development partners, right? To build a lot of these experiences, to really study their challenges and come up with that initial set of experiences that we've now been doing. So I mean, we've got a pretty big list of ideas of things that we want to develop. Just came through questions or challenges that prospects and clients brought forward and are now kind of in the works and are going to be implemented soon. We're definitely developing this kind of self-service mode right now. As we're setting up at Deloitte, we've got a film crew taking videos to kind of turn into explainer videos of how to put these things together.
Cool. Smart.
Yeah, and then I think we're really looking forward to this big event in August in Seattle with PCMA. It's a, the event is called CIMA. It's the Corporate Event Marketers Association. So basically all the kind of leading event planners and kind of top voices in the event industry are gathering in this 2-day event in Seattle, and they've selected us to kind of run a lot of our experiences
Brilliant.
there.
So everyone who plans these things is going to know about
Yeah.
you, which is almost what you need. Like it's interesting. It's very difficult. I find procurement is broken in many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Like this could be a big, meta critique of corporate North America, but like procurement is going through a crisis where it's like no longer, I don't know, through the pandemic, it was one of those divisions that almost got chopped for a lot of enterprises. And they tried to like push it down through the ranks. Like everyone can procure, but we'll limit your spend. And then nothing cool gets bought, or new or interesting. But yeah, this event kind of innovation stuff is one of these examples that like people don't seek out change necessarily.
It's also hard for them to understand what it is until they experience it.
Right.
Even sometimes client themselves, like that, some of the slides you've seen, like there's definitely, a lot of times like Jeff is on stage and I will be kind of working the floor, signaling to him things and communicating with like the show caller or the client to kind of figure out the timing and things like that. And I definitely, a lot of times in the beginning of the event, all the time the agenda is running over and they're like, okay, cut 5 minutes from like Projectory's time and things like that. And then it shifts to, oh, okay, like they love this. Then I remember particularly like a very senior executive, this is like a C-suite executive at a very large organization, saying, nobody touch Projectory time. Like let them have the time. This is what the people want. Like over prioritizing that over like the CFO talking about their financial planning or whatever, because we over the course of the event build the trust. They see what we're able to do and they realize that this serves their experience. But it's hard to get to without showing them. Like we can sit here and talk about it. We can show it on the website, but ultimately, the work we do is happening live with people, and so just seeing that in action is the click that I think is hard to convey or, through procurement or whatever, remotely.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have the same problem, I'm sure, in some ways. You can talk about this space, but
Don't
until
get
you walk
me
in
started
here,
on my problems, my man. Yeah, no, absolutely. I found that this is actually a big, interesting observation that I've had in the last little while is specifically, okay, so we've got two things, right? StartWell is kind of two businesses in one or 3-layered, pie. But like at the base layer, it's meetings and events in terms of like turnkey space for them, right? For corporates. Max size 150 at this venue, 150 people. Then we've got, AV services on top of that, but they're a little bit better than normal. It's kind of like cinematic, camera work. And then on top of that is the media production that can stand alone without the need for people in the room, except on camera. And with all of those, with all of them, I've found that everything is tending towards experiential. Like media, especially, I was really surprised to see that traditional forms of corporate media, corporate content, like the talking head. Like, let's get Jim, the CMO, to talk about how we're going to market to new territories. It's not, no one cares about it.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to care about. But when they are inspired by the means of production as being so accessible, then suddenly, like, we tour people through our studios and they're like, I can do this here, I could do that here. And all the ideas that were in the back of their head about, wouldn't it be nice? Because everyone's got ideas. This is the other thing that people forget about. And this is, part of this like work-life balance divide that's problematic is, especially in the saturated media landscape, I keep finding that there are so many staff or even leaders or CEOs and owners of companies that of all different organizations that have active brains when connecting with what they perceive in the world. And typically that's going to be what they're watching, right? Everyone's watching a lot of content. And everything, because we're a human species, is relational. So you look at that guy on that show and you think, that could be me. I wish we could do that maybe at our company, or I wish I could leave my company and do that for my life. You know, like everyone has this media identity association. So yeah, when touring people through studios, much like your point to show what the product could be as a visual cue rather than an exclusive catalog, we've had to do that as well. We've got 4 looks. You choose the look. You walk through the look and suddenly we need this for that.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting because now it's about throughput. And of course, we're playing catch up post pandemic, but on the fact that for 3 years, no one wanted to tour through anything.
I'm glad that part is over.
Yeah, and it still has its legacy, and the legacy is in economics.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. However, it's in the coming together and positive outputs. Like, I guess this is a question of like, you know, how do people calculate the positive output of an event? We had a banking client that had their first successful town hall in 4 years here at StartWell a few months ago. It was in January, actually. First successful one out of the whole organization of this top tier financial institution. And they have thousands and thousands of staff. And it was scary to them that the success of the event, being a hybrid event, was so good. And all it was content on stage delivered to the audience. But the audience was inspired by the content, not necessarily because the delivery was great, but because the context was great.
Yeah.
In terms of how we animated the screens, it was in this space. And the atmosphere, and the fact that it was boutique because it was 100 people in the audience, and this is a 4,000 person team.
Yeah.
And they were so excited after the event. They're like, we need to do more of these. We'd love to do this on like a monthly basis or even a weekly basis. It was so great. No tech hiccups. Like, it just ran. It was beautiful. And then 2 weeks later, it was like, well, our budgets have been frozen until next fiscal. And I'm like, okay, it's January. When's next fiscal? And the next fiscal was October. And that budget was specifically to do with anything to do with non-essential in person.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads back to this question of, well, what is essential, and how events aren't necessarily outside of the core gathering mandate for your culture. Like, your people, when they're in their cubicles, aren't necessarily, you know, that's a whole big debate. But this
Well, it's
idea
the thing
of,
that feels easy to cut because the pain is delayed,
right.
right? You start trimming those experiential, human, cultural aspects off an organization, and the impact is not immediate.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like, oh, well, it hits the bottom line this quarter. It's a while,
That's a good point.
but eventually you've done something terrible that's really, really hard to remedy. It's really hard to build that stuff back once you've compromised it, but it takes a while to get there. So they feel like, well, we can trim this right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of our role is shoring up the understanding that this stuff actually really matters. It really matters to engagement. It matters to culture, and those things matter to productivity ultimately.
Agreed.
Yeah.
No, I think it's cool. I think what you're onto is cool. I think the fact that it's such a short timeline that it's been, that you've been working on this and testing stuff out in the field, and still like learning so much about what you can take forward is exciting.
Yeah, it's been fun. We love it.
Nice.
It's really tapping into everyone's passion, and feels like we created something unique. So it's great to be able to showcase and get to do what we love doing and see that people respond to it in such positivity. So yeah, it's been a good ride so far.
Thanks for sharing your story, man.
Thank you.